Everyone, I'm Dr. Yvonne Skipper from the University of Glasgow. If you enjoyed the last video where we did some different activities, this one is going to tell you a little bit more about some of the psychological research that's been done on how your brain works. So your brain can change when you learn new things. So we used to think that this only happened when we were children, and when we became adults, our brains kind of became quite static and they couldn't learn new things. But actually, although children's brains have more connections in them, and quite often it's easier to learn certain things when we're younger, doesn't mean that we can't learn things when we're older, because actually our brain is always able to grow and change as we're learning new things. And this is called brain plasticity. So when you learn new things, your brain forms new connections and it's able to change itself. This is an example of what's happening in your brain. So you can see here's a nerve cell, here's another nerve cell, and this is what's actually happening when you learn new things, is those two nerves are kind of connecting to each other and they find each other, and that creates a kind of connection between them and a new pathway for the knowledge to travel. So this is literally what's happening in your brain, hopefully right now, if you're learning some new things. So what does this look like in real life? Well, here's a famous study, and basically what they did, this was pre-sat navs. They looked at the brains of London bus drivers and London taxi drivers. So bus drivers are just going on the same route every day, so they follow exactly the same pathways around London. Even if they're doing two different pathways, it's the same and they're running on a loop. Whereas taxi drivers, someone got in and said, hey, take me to Charing Cross, and they'd have to be able to map out exactly how to get to Charing Cross from wherever they were. So they had to have a really good knowledge of all the different streets of London, whereas the bus drivers were following the same routes. And what they did is they used MRI scans, which let us look at what's happening in their brains. And basically what they found is taxi drivers had greater gray matter volume in the mid-posterior hippocampi. That's very complicated words, but basically what that means is that the bit of your brain that helps you to find your way around was much bigger in the taxi drivers than in the bus drivers. So this is the bit of your brain that you use when you're thinking, okay, how do I get to school in the morning? Or maybe you have to go somewhere new. You've got to think, okay, so I know that it's near my nan's house, but I need to take the second left after that. So it's the bit of your brain that allows you to find your way around. And what they found is that the taxi drivers' brains were changing. That bit of the brain got bigger because they were using it so much. So our brains, that's showing the actual areas and parts of our brains get bigger when we need them. Similarly, ballet dancers, the bit of your brain that gets that stops you getting dizzy is bigger in ballet dancers because they spend a lot of their time spinning, and so they don't want to be dizzy all the time, and their brain actually starts to make changes. That part of the brain actually gets smaller as well. Here's another study where they looked at the brains of students, and what they did is they looked at the brains before their exams and then after their exams. So before their exams, then they started studying, and then after the exams when they finished studying. And then they compared those to the brains of students who were just doing normal day-to-day stuff. They weren't actually studying for an exam at the time. And what they found is that everybody's, the bit of the brain that is involved in memory and learning got bigger for everybody, which you'd expect, right? Because hopefully all students are learning all the time, but the changes were much bigger in the students who were actually studying for an exam. So this shows that the learning they were doing actually did change their brains, and this was much bigger change for those students who were really studying very hard at that point. They were doing lots of practicing and lots of thinking about the knowledge for their exams. Here's an older study, and what they did was they were interested in looking at violinists. So this was in a music academy, and they wanted to know who is going to be the best violin players. So in this academy, they had people who were studying to be international soloists. There were people who were studying to play in orchestras, and then there were people who were studying to be music teachers. And they wanted to look at them and kind of go, okay, what makes some of these guys, international soloists? What is it about them that makes them so special? So they looked at things to do with their life. They found that most of them started playing instruments when they were about 8. They wanted to be musicians about 15. They had about 4 teachers. They studied a couple of instruments before the violin. So there weren't really that many differences between them. But what they did find was a really big difference in the number of hours they spent practicing. So the absolute best violinists practiced for 10,000 hours, good violinists for 8,000 hours, and the ones who were weaker had only practiced for but still a lot of hours, for 4,000. So in this study, there were no exceptions. So the people who were really going to do very well in the violin were the ones who spent the most time practicing it. So this means for learning, based on the activities we did earlier, So first of all, you need to pay attention. You cannot learn without paying attention. Secondly, you need to practice. So like in the head, shoulders, knees and toes activity, the more you practice at something, the better you get. And you need to use techniques. So like in the word memory activity, using good techniques can make learning easier. So thinking about how you can apply this to your own learning, you need to think about paying attention. You need to be able to bring your attention back when you think it's wandered. You know, when you start daydreaming, make sure to bring it back. You need to be happy to practice and spend your time practicing, because remember in that violin study, it was the people who practiced the most who were the best. And you need to find different techniques to learn. So if you're struggling to learn something, maybe you can try and turn it into a song, or maybe you can think about other things that you know that sound like it, or try and attach it to lots of different things. So try different skills and different ways to learn. And that way your brain will be able to change as you grow and learn new things. I hope that's been interesting for you, and enjoy.